Okay, I've selected Nantgarw. Tell me the name of the street.
It's taking me to Nantgarw. Where is Nantgarw? Hello and welcome to A Tribe Called Cars. My name is Ben Griffin, and today I'm going to answer a very important question. Well, kind of important. And that question is whether the BMW 1 Series has lost any of its charm in ditching rear-wheel drive. Of course, we all knew what the internet was going to say about this decision. It was not going to go well, because this was one of the relatively affordable and practical rear-wheel drive cars. So you could have a reasonable amount of your cake and eat it. Sadly though, like all good things in life, it finished and died and whatever. So now we have to have front-wheel drive. And what that means to the uninitiated, the front wheels are driven as opposed to the rear ones. And of course that, if you know your stuff, changes the dynamic feel of the car. Now, there are actually some positives and negatives associated with swapping to front-wheel drive. So although I can understand why some people are angry, it's not actually all bad. For one thing, front-wheel drive is more accessible. You can drive faster, and correcting a mistake is typically easier. You normally just have to deal with understeer, where the car sort of wants to continue on in a straight line and you need to go around a corner. So not the best thing to have to deal with, but really normally you just ease off the accelerator, brake a bit and allow the car to regain enough grip to then go around the corner. And if you've really overcooked it, you may have to straighten the wheels to then try again, because that also helps the car grab its grip. With rear-wheel drive, you have to deal with oversteer, which is terrifying, and unless you catch that slide quickly enough where the rear wheels want to overtake the front, that can be terrifying. Front wheel drive can be fun, it's thrashy, you can get the front wheels spinning, be a bit of a hooligan, but I don't think it's ever going to be quite as lively and as involving as if the rear wheels are at the back doing their own thing, spinning, drifting the car a tiny bit, that kind of stuff. Another benefit is if you need traction. Front wheel drive is typically less inclined to get stuck in mud. If you've ever taken a rear-wheel drive car to a National Trust car park and it's been a very wet day, well, you may find yourself just a little bit stuck and you may have to ask people to help push you out. Not that that's ever happened to me, but it does sound like something that could well happen. With that said, there are times when I've just been driving around as a normal human and not an idiot, and the front wheels have just broken traction. And then there's a quick sort of skittish moment and I'm trying to get back, just sort of unsettles the car, sounds a bit annoying. It's not especially bad, but that is something you really don't get as often in a rear-wheel drive car. I think it's worth pointing out though that the car I'm in now is the 118i, which is the sort of entry-level little 138 brake horsepower odd petrol engine. Not hugely powerful, and of course you also have some diesels to contend with if you would rather go that route and enjoy better fuel economy and whatnot. Now, this is always going to be one of the biggest sellers because it's a bit cheaper, it's a bit more practical, cheaper on fuel, cheaper to insure, that kind of stuff. So this car is going to sell loads in comparison to the M135i. Now, given that we know that the petrol head aficionado is ever decreasing in size, that means most people will not notice this car is front-wheel drive at all. In fact, if you say FWD, front-wheel drive, they'll probably look at you blankly. But as you move up in power and as you start to crave that performance feeling and excitement, then I think it becomes a bigger problem. For the M135i, it's no longer rear-wheel drive, so it's all-wheel drive. Now, of course, that works in the VW Golf R and a few others. It's fine. Actually, sometimes having all-wheel drive can be beneficial if you get stuck in a National Trust car park, for instance. But people did love the fact, including myself, that it was rear-wheel drive and it was ballistic. And of course, now it's probably still ballistic, but even if you sort of control the amount of power going to the back and front, because you can with all-wheel drive, you can choose the bias and when it swaps power to the front and back and whatever, it's still going to feel different than something that is always powering the rear and never the front. Fun drinking game, every time I mention front, do a shot. Now that brings me on neatly to my next main point about this car, the engine. Now this isn't the most powerful engine, but I have to say it's actually pretty decent. It makes a reasonable enough noise. It gives the impression that it's kind of pokey. It's got a bit of performance. When you jab your foot, there's something there. I think the problem with this is that you then bury your foot further and not a lot changes. So you get quite a lot early and then that's about it. But that's fine. I would say you can still enjoy and have quite a lot of fun in this, even though it is substantially less horsepower than the top end model. I will say though, is that the combination of improved refinement and this engine makes the cabin so quiet. In fact, the problem is actually that it's so quiet that it emphasizes the other noises that aren't so good, such as the noise when you hit a pothole. It's fine, it's okay, but generally the cabin is very, very quiet. I think at this price point, you would expect to be a little noisier, but actually for a hatchback, you're getting impressive refinement you would usually have got in years gone by on something much more expensive. So that's pretty cool. Now going back to the M135i, another big reason why you bought that car, or the M140i, which was actually my favourite with the Balcaston engine, it was a straight six. And straight sixes are awesome. My personal car, which I've never really told anyone what it is, but I will one day, is a straight six. They're awesome. The power delivery is quite linear, but it kicks in early. The noise is lovely. They're nice. They have good amounts of character. Not perhaps as much as a V8, but then they have their own positives as well. A little less thirsty, for example, and usually lighter. The new one is a 2-litre 4-cylinder, and yes, fine, it's got loads of brake horsepower, and fine, it's got loads of torque, and it kicks in early. And to be fair, I've not driven it yet, so maybe it is quite exciting, but generally, when you go from 6 to 4, things don't get better at Porsche. So now we come to the looks, which I think is a positive and a negative, and here's why. For some reason these days, BMW has employed someone who basically their job is just to make the grille larger, and this is one of the cars that's happened to. It is quite amusing because I don't know why they're doing it, but it is ugly. Making the grille larger, the kidney grille, is not necessarily the way to creating a style icon or something pretty. But unfortunately they've spent a lot of money and all their cars seem to be going that way. Luckily on this car it's not too big, and generally I think there are some nice touches. You can still see that it's a 1 Series, but you can tell it's a little fresher in the face. I like some of the angles on this car. I actually really like the rear view. I think it's cool. The rear taillights are nice. I like the headlights. The side profile is pretty decent. It's generally, I think, quite appealing. It was never a style icon. Let's not get upset that they've changed it and added a grille, because let's face it, the 1 Series really wasn't the best at all. It was only because you had rear-wheel drive and an awesome engine and good driving dynamics that it was tempting. I think the issue that people have is that it's become very generic, and I agree with this. The side profile could be Ford Focus. In fact, a few angles could be the Ford Focus, which, as nice as it is to drive and as much more refined it is these days, in fact they're not that different. Don't tell BMW. But if you're buying a BMW, do you want it to look like a Ford Focus? Probably not, particularly as they're not going to be the same price. Because at least the 1 Series, love or hate it, had its own thing. Now I just feel like this blends in more. I understand why though. It's because they made the boot bigger and interior space bigger, and ultimately a combination of what humans are shaped like, what you're allowed to do with a car, and all the safety stuff, you will end up with a shape that is most efficient. And of course the downside of maximum efficiency is that everything looks the same. So sadly, it's probably going to become more and more common, especially as companies are sharing platforms and other things. In any case, being able to fit more wine in the back or whatever it is you buy, and having more space if you're a passenger, is a good thing. Back to the 118i, this car is what I would say a quite honed ride. So it has the multi-link on all models, which is nice. It's a little bit more sophisticated than your usual budget sort of suspension system. Now that does mean that typically the car rides very well, it's composed, not too much body roll, it feels agile in the corners, and it doesn't unsettle itself and then you lose grip, that kind of stuff. So it's good, but over the small stuff or you hit a hard pothole, and not only is it noisy as I said earlier, it's a bit jittery all the time, doesn't sort of relax. This isn't the best road, I'll admit, but it's kind of, you can feel every tiny bump through the car, and that's good for driving fast and involvement. But if you just want to get home and you've got a bit of a headache, or you're not feeling well, or you're just tired, whatever, then that isn't necessarily the best thing. I would say it's perhaps worth considering the less sporty suspension if you're going for the smaller engines, because actually on British roads it may help you smooth things out and actually potentially drive a little bit quicker, more easily. Now BMW has also, in an attempt to liven the car up, made the steering very fast, a tiny turn, and it is a dramatic movement. And this helps the car feel more lively, more energetic. It gives it a sort of a slightly sportier edge, and I will say I really, really like it. The combination of that and the chunky steering wheel, which some people hate, I personally really like it, works nicely. For a car that is these days really, really low in power, particularly in a hatchback, or a sporty hatchback, it does wonders. Now you can have a 7-speed auto and a 6-speed manual. If I'm honest, I do like the 6-speed in this. I think it's nice, but it isn't, it's sort of smooth. It doesn't have a lot of feel, but there's still a kind of notchiness to it, which you can hear. It's sort of either you go for that mechanical thing, or you simply just have very, very smooth. And BMW has gone for this happy medium that I'm not necessarily enamored with. Comfort is another thing I think this car does really, really well. It's got quite sporty seats, but not unnecessarily so. They're not too firm. They are good at holding you in place, but without making you want to have spinal surgery, or need to have spinal surgery when you get out at your destination. I guess if you're a little more weight endowed, shall we say, then perhaps these might not be the best, but for me, they're pretty good. Another negative is the sheer number of buttons in here. I imagine something from NASA would seem only slightly more complicated. It's that bad. There are just buttons everywhere. It's a little bit annoying. Now that's not to say I dislike buttons, because actually they are safer than if you're faffing around with a touchscreen. So kudos to BMW for actually using them instead of ditching them, you know, Tesla style, as most other manufacturers are doing. And of course you have the iDrive rotary controller, although you have to pay extra for iDrive 7, just throw that in there. But that also makes life easier, and you can use your voice to say commands, but it takes so long for it to work out what you've said, and when I actually said something it got it wrong. I probably wouldn't use it myself, but you can say things like, I'm cold, and it will up the heaters, that kind of stuff. So some people might like that. I don't really care. Also, I quite like the TFT display that replaced digital dials, but it's not as variable and as useful as the ones you get in other manufacturers' cars, such as Audi. You can't really display as much. I personally like a mixture of analog dials with some digital stuff going on. I think that's really cool, particularly in a sporty BMW like the M135i. On a related note, some of the plastics in here, they're that really horrible textured, whatever it is, stuff, and it's a bit like a sort of wrinkly elephant. And it's fine, you see it in so many cars, but I don't know, it's not the most appealing. And now we answer the $1 million question: has this car suffered from going to front wheel drive? And for me, the answer is not really. Most people won't notice, as I said earlier, and as someone who does notice, I think on the 118i, it doesn't bother me at all. Some of my favourite hatchbacks are front wheel drive, Civic Type R, i30N, and it didn't really matter for them. So in some ways, I kind of wish that the M135i had gone for front wheel drive with loads of power and just gone that route. All-wheel drive for me is a little less exciting, a little less predictable. It's not my favourite. The Golf R I find a bit sterile, and that's partly why. But yeah, the 118i, not really noticed a huge amount at all. The car's still lively, still drives well, it's still got that BMW feel, 100%. It is definitely a BMW at heart. You get in this and you can tell.
Hello, what can I help you with?
Oh, I didn't ask you to join in. This is not the time, BMW lady.
Could you repeat that, please?
No.
Please first tell me the name.
No!
Okay, I've selected Nangaru. Tell me the name of the street.
It's taking me to Nant Guru. Where is Nant Guru? Yep, I have no idea. Oh, there is actually a place called Nant. Maybe we should go there. Who lives at Nant Guru? It sounds kind of African.
I'm sorry. Please try.
Oh, she's still talking. So although this car is new and dramatically different, BMW has actually kept it really rather like how it was in previous generations. And that's a good thing, because I've always really loved the 1 Series. It's an important bit of motoring for those who just want a pretty decent hatchback. However, it was also great for performance enthusiasts, and perhaps that is where this car will have faltered a bit. But until BMW lends me the M135i, I can't tell you whether that's true or not. I will have to reserve judgment. But I am concerned it may not be as fun as the M140i. God, I wanted that car. Still do. Maybe get a second-hand one in burnt orange. Ooh, yeah, that would be awesome. Anyway, thank you for visiting A Tribe Called Cars. I have been Ben Griffin, and I will still be, actually, after this video stops rolling and I stop talking. If you've enjoyed it, found it useful, then please like and subscribe. You don't have to, it's optional, but it would help if you did. Anyway, have a wonderful week, and I shall see you in the next video. Bye.